Hello, I'm Erin Blaze. Welcome to The Truth About Real Estate. Today we're going to talk about changes to the way appraisals are done and also about a special home loan program. Today my guests are Bob Lawler, a professional appraiser, and Rory Dunham from Allied Mortgage. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think first I want to talk about how appraisals have changed. There's a new rule, I guess you could call it, the House Valuation Code of Conduct that just came out this year.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what it is and how it works.
Yeah, the Home Valuation Code of Conduct basically originated from a lawsuit against Freddie and Fannie Mae from the Attorney General of New York, Cuomo, started, and he wanted to ensure appraiser independence from lender pressure. So they wanted to separate the appraisal process from appraisers from any contact with the lenders. And so they had thought of different ways about doing that. They set up appraisal, they try to establish it through an appraisal management company. They also have set up where the independence comes through a list of a rotation through a bank's list of appraisers, and set up a lot of guidelines around that throughout the whole process, really from start to finish. Rory might be able to add a few things on how it's affected you on a.
Well, basically, to kind of reiterate what Bob said, a year ago, 18 months ago, when a lender wanted to obtain an appraisal, we placed our order directly with a local appraiser of our choosing, and the correspondence was directly broker, lender, appraiser. And what we have seen on the conventional side of lending is the only area that this has affected thus far, is that to obtain an appraisal now, we actually have to place the order with the end lender, who then outsources that to an appraisal management company who randomly selects someone. And generally speaking, it isn't until the completed report is returned to us that we even have any knowledge of who the appraiser is. In any type of questions, comments, issues with that appraisal, the communication has to go directly to the appraisal management company, who then communicates with the appraiser. There's no communication between the lender and the appraiser.
And it basically regulates even that communication. If it does occur, it can't have anything to do with the value or influence of value. It can only be related to the timeliness and the due dates and things like that, if there were to be any contact. And it also even has how we can appraisers can accept payments and things like that too, from start to finish. The one thing I was going to add on the process too, and I've lost it now.
I was going to say, I have a question. I kind of have a question about if someone who is in an appraisal management company is picking the appraiser, the thing that we've seen as a realtor in our office is they might, if they don't know anything about the Columbia, Missouri market, they might pick someone who looks like they would know something about the market and they really don't, because maybe they're 20 miles away. And then they either don't have access to the information or they have it, but they don't know what's a good comp. Do you have any idea how they're deciding? I mean, is it just really a random rotation?
Well, I think there was some confusion in the start with that, where there was a random rotation, and they were telling appraisers that they needed to go into areas that they didn't have expertise in. And that's really against the rules for an appraiser to do to start with. So they're asking the appraiser to do something wrong. To start with, the appraiser ought to turn down that assignment. They should not go into that area where they don't have expertise. And expertise comes from, two things: doing appraisals in that area, but also having access to the local MLS database, legal access. That means having a membership with that database. And we ran into some of those instances I'm aware of around here where we had appraisers coming in from out of town and gaining access to the database illegally, which actually invalidates that appraisal at the same time. because it has to, all that information gathered in the appraisal process has to be obtained legally.
Well, then what happens to the appraisal? Does the buyer still have to pay for it if it was an illegally obtained information?
They may have already paid for it.
Oh.
You know, from the lender, they may have paid up front. They may not be able to get the loan. The lender that originated or started to originate the loan may not be able to find a buyer for that loan based on that appraisal, and they may have to order another one.
Well, are the realtors still allowed to supply comps if an appraiser asks for comps?
That's actually outlined in the HVCC. That's not allowed as well.
Okay.
You cannot supply the comparables. And for the appraiser to do the research correctly, they have to have access to the database. There's no way around it, because they have to go through select their own comparables, do their own research. And there's also a new market analysis report that has to be included in there, where they have to do a lot of research about the volumes of sales in the area, and if it's to designate if it's an increasing or a decreasing or stable market. And lenders are looking for that as well.
What if there's just something that's a clear error? Like, I know I had one this year where it said declining market, but it wasn't, and the appraiser just changed it. If it's just an error, are they still allowed to change it?
If it's just a checkbox error, that's an easy fix.
Okay.
To hopefully go back and change it. If there's other errors where the comparable selection was poorly done, or some other problem, if it was from that outside appraiser, those are harder because they are more analytical. That guy's got to go back and find access to the database and get new comparables and things like that, so they really can't do that. And the things that I've been advising people to do is really to keep the business local. That way you find more local appraisers. And also, when the appraiser comes to the door, ask for the name of the appraiser, find out, actually a lot of recommendations have been going out to ask for a picture ID to prove that it's them, and validate that with the name and on the appraisal, because we've had some instances where a person shows up at the door is not the appraiser's name on the report.
Well, that happens. I was going to say that's been happening for a while. Like they'll send their assistant out. Are they allowed to do that?
No, that is not allowed.
Oh,
not allowed.
okay.
The appraiser that signs it has to see it. That's Missouri law. That is Missouri
I didn't know
law.
that.
That's right.
Well, what happens to the house then? Does it have any effect on the house for the seller if the first deal, besides the fact that they've lost the sale, but can the seller turn around and sell the house to someone else without having an effect of having this appraisal that was done illegally, or just had bad comps and made the house look like it didn't have the value it should have?
Yeah, they can start the process over again, I suppose. That gets more difficult. I know Rory probably has some things that can, because of these new rules that are along with the timeline of reviewing of things.
In speaking from a broker standpoint, if we ordered a national vendor appraisal from one of our investors, and that report was returned, and it was not something that we could use for our particular loan. And Bob's absolutely right. Being able to challenge information that's provided on one of these appraisals is extremely difficult, especially when you're dealing with a value issue, or, I certainly understand the premise behind what was done, to weed out those relationships between lenders and appraisers where values were being inflated just to make sure that the deal was structured. But at the same time, there are legitimate concerns sometimes where comps are concerned, or adjustments are concerned, that are really, in my experience, have been difficult to overcome. But if we found ourselves in a situation where a particular appraisal could not be used due to whatever reason, we would have to switch lenders to be able to start that process over. Because what happens when we order these appraisals directly from the investor, who then outsources it to a national vendor, is that the first place that completed report goes is into the investor's system. So it's not like I have the option, or we have the option of saying, nope, that one's no good, let's go for another one and see if we can make that work. You know, at that point in time, we are, it can be done, but there's a lot of things that can happen in that time. You know, interest rates come and go, and so it could be a very difficult process. But one thing, just to add to I have had some experience with out-of-town appraisers being assigned. I've heard a lot of concern from local realtors about that particular issue, and I really, truly believe that there are systems being implemented by these national vendor companies, because, you know, depending on where you're located, 20 miles if you're in a big city, you're still a part of that area, whereas you take 20 miles here and there's a huge difference between Fulton versus Columbia. Yeah. And what I'm seeing in some of the notes as I get updated on appraisal order status is they're asking for a little more information about the individual appraiser to ensure that they have the credentials to be able to go and do an effective appraisal in the area. But again, another thing is that some of the responsibility falls on the appraiser to make that decision as to whether or not they will accept that assignment based on what they know they can do. And I really think that the situations that we've seen here locally are the exception, not the rule, as to how this new system is working. But of course, bad news always spreads quicker than good news, so that's what we're going to hear about the most. But you know, I can confidently say that 99% of the HVCC appraisals that I have had have all been local appraisers that I used prior to the implementation of that particular process. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was in the beginning of the process when the HVCC, the AMC flipped the switch over to ordering appraisals on a random basis. They didn't have it geographically based well enough. And also that issue of trainees or appraisers that actually aren't a licensed appraiser yet, getting that assignment for the licensed appraiser, which is a problem. Then it's very limited. I hope I think realtors have helped out, sleuth out some of those problems. You know, during refinancing, I think those folks ought to be aware of that as well, because they don't have the realtor's help.
Right.
Because they're the first thing the appraiser is going to call the realtor to get into the property. Well, the appraiser calls the homeowner in the other case. So they should ask those extra questions of the appraiser just to double check.
Yeah, I know as a realtor, every time I get the email, I look to see who the appraiser is so I can make sure they're local. And there's actually only one I've had this year that I actually called and questioned why the person, you know, was doing the appraisal. All the other ones were people I knew and felt confident about. I wanted to ask you also about these companies, these appraisal management companies. I guess most of them are new, and I'm wondering about like the relationship between them and the banks, because don't some banks own appraisal management companies?
Just the large national banks own an appraisal management company, and I think it's limited. Now, part of the HVCC rules was supposed to strip that apart too, and they're not supposed to be able to have their own appraisal management companies. I don't know if that ended up in the final law or not, but yeah, they do, and they use their own. You know, a lot of them have a whole separate system to do that process. So, you know, I think that was just an extra. You know, a lot of even the local banks have set up their own separate departments for the appraisal process. So there's no crossover in between from the lender, the mortgage lender, working with the buyer or the person applying for the loan, between them and directly to the appraiser. The appraiser always talks to a staff person at the bank.
Okay, I was just concerned that we'd have like, Bank of America having their own appraisal management company and having it be almost like that was an employee of theirs doing the appraisal.
No, it's not an employee. It'd be all subcontracted. Now, some banks can't have their own appraisers and do, and that's actually okay under the rule. So.
Oh, okay, all right, I was just worried about it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about, I wanted to talk about the USDA loan. I've had only one person use it this year, and I think a lot of people don't know about it. Can you really buy a house now with no money down?
Absolutely, and that is, one of the things that I guess frustrates me sometimes about the media is unless it's about some celebrity and something wonderful that's happening with them, the news that is reported to the public tends to be about the negative things that are happening. And there is absolutely no question, no mystery that in the last 12 to 18 months we have had some serious issues in the mortgage industry and in the housing industry. And that has resulted in extreme tightening in lending guidelines. 100% loan programs that were available and very common practice a year plus ago are no longer available. And so in that aspect, what the media tells us is true. That's absolutely true. Fannie and Freddie have tightened their requirements for loan approval. HUD has done the same thing where FHA and VA are concerned. But what we need to follow that up with is, but there's still loan programs available. And one of those is the USDA Rural Development Loan. To give you just kind of a snapshot of what the program is, this is a program that is tied to USDA. It was a program that was designed to encourage people to populate less densely populated areas. And kind of another misnomer about USDA is that because it's a rural development loan, you're going to have to go buy some farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere, and that's just not true. Kind of the rule of thumb is that this program was designed to encourage people to purchase properties in communities where the population is less than 20,000, but also, generally speaking, if you are outside the city limits of a community where the population is greater than 20,000, more often than not, the property will still qualify USDA. There are many properties that have a Columbia, Missouri mailing address that are USDA eligible. It is a 100% loan program. It requires no down payment at all. It allows for the seller to contribute for the closing costs. It even allows for some expenses tied to the loan, closing costs and prepaids, to actually be financed in on top of the loan. Interest rates are very competitive to your government loans, FHA and VA. And the really neat part about this is that there's no monthly mortgage insurance. There is a funding fee that mirrors the funding fee of FHA and VA. It's a percentage of the loan that is actually financed in on top of the loan, but there's no mortgage insurance. It is a loan program that has been available for a long time. And it just has not been utilized simply because there were other programs, conventional loan programs, that were more popular, more well-known, and so USDA just kind of stood in the shadows. But now that we're still trying to figure out how to get people into homes, no money down, the last time I was on the show, we talked about combining FHA with the City of Columbia's down payment assistance program. But this is definitely a way for people who may not meet those criteria or have hopes of being in a community that's not in Columbia, Asheville, Ashland, Mexico, Centralia, Hallsville, Holt Summit, all of these places are USDA no questions asked eligible. And
well, how do you figure out which houses are going to be in the zone?
well, I tell you what, generally speaking, and I say this with 99% certainty, if the city and state of the property you're looking at is tied to a community that has a population of less than 20,000, no question that's going to be eligible. If you are looking at, speaking locally, Jeff City property or a Columbia property, you need to get with a lender who can cross-reference that information for you to look it up to see if it is available. I know that a lot of real estate professionals, you and I have done this for listings that you have. We determine up front what type of lending availability is there.
That's true. I should do a commercial. I have a listing out in Reform, Missouri.
And I tell you what, it's, you know.
You can get a USDA loan in Reform, Missouri.
Absolutely you can. Most definitely you can. You know, there's a lot of talk going on right now that USDA funds, they have no funds available right now. There is some truth to that. USDA, their fiscal year ends tomorrow, and so their 2009 is over. October 1st begins their 2010. There will be a short span of time, 30 to 45 days before 2010's money arrives, and during that time, essentially, they do not have any money. However, we did research today on lenders that are still going to fund these loans in the interim while they wait for USDA to get their financial injection. And so there's been a lot of concern. A lot of people have heard about USDA is running out of money, and I'm just here to kind of abolish that fear. These loans are still available. We will still close these loans over the next 30 to 45 days.
Is there any kind of special, do you have to have any kind of special appraisal or any kind of special inspection with these loans?
Typically what these lenders encourage is for us to order an appraisal from an FHA certified appraiser, because the property requirements on a USDA loan mirror those that come out of the HUD handbook that FHA appraisers apply. So basically what we're looking for is the appraiser, in addition to the standard report that they will do, to verify and then comment that it meets the standards outlined in the HUD handbook where property condition, et cetera, is concerned.
Right, and also October 1st is another date for the USDA and FHA where they start using appraisers that are certified and above only. If a licensed appraiser cannot do an FHA loan.
What's the difference between certified and licensed?
It depends on the state testing and the hours of experience in the beginning, and that it's based on that. It's easier to get your license than it is to be certified. The step above that is a general general appraiser, which can do both commercial and residential.
But don't you already have to have 2,000 hours before you could even get your license?
Yeah, you have
is
to
it
get the license.
20,000?
They've raised all the numbers since I've done
Okay.
it. It's actually, I think it's up to like 3,000 now for a certified. I think it's 2,000 for license. But yeah, October 1st is the deadline, and some of those, there are some things that be concerned about a little bit with the FHA or USDA requirements for that house. Sometimes it'll be as simple as peeling paint on the walls, or exterior if the house is built before 1978. It's a lead-based paint potential hazard. So what the FHA appraiser is looking for is to make sure it's safe, sound, and secure. And so if there's anything that is hazardous to the buyer, to the occupants of the home, the appraiser reports that, and it will need to be fixed prior to closing.
Okay. All right. So Well, that's pretty amazing because we have 60 days left on the tax credit. Someone could buy a house with USDA, get the $8,000 due.
That's absolutely right. No money down.
What about, are there any fees that they have to pay? Because I know my client that got the USDA loan, all she paid was $10.
From a lender's standpoint, every cost associated with doing the loan can be financed in a certain percentage or seller paid. I have worked with quite a few borrowers that actually got their earnest money deposit back at close. And so that made buying a house cheaper than paying last month's rent and a lease. And 30 to 45 days later, they get a check for up to $8,000 back from the government.
That's
awesome. Not too bad.
That's wonderful. All right, well, if you have any questions or anything that you'd like me to cover on the show, please email me at thetruthaboutrealestate@gmail.com. That's thetruthaboutrealestate@gmail.com. And you still have 60 days left if you would like to purchase a home to get the up to $8,000 tax credit. So keep that in mind. And thanks for watching. Okay.